Raising money for worthy charities is often a matter of focusing public attention on them. Determined to do my part if I could, I recently visited a worthy institution which has not received much publicity. The Rainy Day Kids Home from School Parents Drop-In Shelter. Most people refer to it simply as Rainy Day. It was a pathetic sight, even a harrowing one. The shelter has obtained almost no funding in the past year, and therefore it was occupying a woefully inadequate temporary space, the basketball court of a suburban Y. People were everywhere. The immediate need had been created by a teacher's in-service day, combined with the leading edge of a massive low-pressure front. It was early afternoon, and the scene resembled London during the Blitz. Emergency cots and mattresses had been set up all around the room, and nearly all of them were supporting the exhausted bodies of parents whose children were on vacation from school. Above the reception desk was a poster was hanging. It depicted several couples with dazed, shell-shocked expressions. "Please give," it read. "Don't wait for your rainy day." On the walls there were drawings of rainbows in cheerful colors, but outside the rain pattered ominously on the windows. In several instances I could see whimpering parents huddled together for warmth and emotional support. The sight of this nearly broke my heart. If ever people needed help, it was these. So powerfully did the pity well up in me that I made a terrible, if inadvertent, mistake. I was being guided through the room at the time by Dr. Eunice Gibbons, director of the center. "This is nothing," she was whispering to me. "Summer is our worst time, of course. That and the holidays, Christmas and spring break." She did not need to make a speech to convince me of the suffering of these poor unfortunate people. I could see it in their haunted faces in row on row. When I could stand it no longer, I turned to the doctor and said, "What can I do?" That was my big mistake. I could tell by the stricken look of horror on her face. Dr. Gibbons later explained to me that it was probably the single most inappropriate comment I could have made. She said these people had just come from situations in which they were trapped inside houses with hordes of youngsters all clamoring that very question. "What can I do? What can I do? Mommy, Daddy, what can I do?" My question produced an immediate and frightening effect in that room. People who had previously appeared to be completely enervated suddenly came to life, sitting up, their eyes burning with fear or an unnatural anger. Some of them began to shake and sob, others shook their fists at me. Another began to shout hysterically, "No, you've had enough cookies." In no time the room was a cacophony of voices. "Put a coat on, wipe your feet, blow your nose. We're out of hot chocolate, we're out of hot chocolate," one woman was screaming. Dr. Gibbons indicated her with a discreet nod of her head. "A particularly difficult case," she said. "She can't sleep, poor thing. She's having nightmares about those little marshmallows." Dr. Gibbons then seized me firmly by the elbow and led me out of the room. She told me if we hadn't left with such dispatch, some of the parents who were still in a state of shock might have tried to tear me limb from limb. "I'm sorry I upset them, doctor," I said, "but I truly would like to help. Just tell me what I can do, or to help, I mean." "You can start by pledging never to utter those awful words in here again. These people are weak and very vulnerable. Also, try to refrain from saying things like, 'Gee, I'm bored,' or 'There's nothing to do.' Either could trigger an extremely violent reaction." "I'll be careful," I said, "but isn't there something positive I could do to help them?" "You could donate money, of course," Dr. Gibbons said. "It's tax deductible, and we have lovely premiums for people who choose to give at certain levels." "Like what?" I asked her. "Well, let's say you want to become a $100 contributor. That's very generous. Then you would receive this handsome volume entitled 7.5 million Things You and Your Children Can Do Indoors on a Rainy Day." She showed one to me, and I was impressed. "It's so creative," I marveled. "Why, I bet if the people in that room had a copy of this book, they wouldn't have to come to this shelter." Dr. Gibbons looked at me in disbelief. Don't be absurd, she said. This book is absolutely worthless when it comes to that. No child will ever want to do any of those things, and if they try, they get glue all over the place. I use it as a bit of humorous reading before I go to sleep at night, and also the pages make handy scraps for starting fires. I wrote out a check on the spot. Besides the money, doctor, are there any other ways in which I might help? What about food? Oh, yes. We accept all donations of edibles. Canned goods are best. No boxes of cake mix. Also, no cookies or snacks. We don't use the C word here. And the other thing we ask is that you do not give or mention soup. Why not? Most of the people here associate soup with rain and the difficult experience they've just been through. The thought of soup, or heaven forbid, the smell of soup, can provoke considerable agitation. Okay, no soup. Tell me, doctor, your help here, is it strictly volunteer? Yes, predominantly from people who've been through this themselves, although we do get a few who knew a loved one or a neighbor who'd been victimized. Our first goal is personality reintegration. After that, we strive to reintroduce a few social skills. We don't press, however. Mostly what we try to do is provide a non-threatening environment, peace and quiet. You will notice, for instance, that there is an absolute ban on televisions and radios. What about children? It depends, she said. Naturally, at some point, these people will have to be re-exposed to their children, as well as rain, I might add. But we do our best to go about it gradually. When they first come here, they're not capable of dealing with kids. They're barely functional at all, as you saw for yourself. So we put them in a section of the room that is effectively quarantined from children. As time passes and they slowly recover their senses, we try to find acceptable ways for them to express their pent-up emotions. Following that, we encourage them to mingle and attempt group activities like charades and cards. This shows them that life is worth living and people can get along without necessarily kicking one another. Then comes the hard part. What happens? I guess it's what you might call the reality therapy part of our treatment program. It's when we remind the people of their parental duties. Some of them have so much fun playing with the other parents or simply relaxing and enjoying themselves. She broke off with a misty look in her eyes. I'm afraid we can't permit that kind of escapist behavior to continue. This is tragic, I said. But there's hope, she said. Let me tell you a touching story which happened just the other day. A man came up to me. He was carrying a book in his hand and he had tears in his eyes. I asked him what was wrong, and he smiled and said, Nothing. Nothing's wrong, Dr. Gibbons. It's wonderful. It's a miracle. I didn't understand what he meant, and then he held up the book and said, I just read 2 pages in a row, top to bottom. That's the first time that's happened in 5 years. That's a beautiful story, I said. Yes, well, but all good things must come to an end. We have to remind our parents that they are parents and that their children are waiting for them at home. We try to stress the innocence and inherent goodness of children, as well as the essential nature of the familial bond. But in some instances, I'm afraid we also have to tell them that school's out and it's still raining. Dear God, I said. Yes, she said, biting her lip and wringing her hands. You can see there's still so much to be done.